All right. So today, again, the session is on personal finance. So this is information you're not going to be quizzed on. It's not covered in the textbook. This is additional information I'm providing to you that I think will be valuable. It's based on my experience as a financial advisor for the past decade, and as well as research that I've done. And I think it'll be beneficial to you both in your professional career, but also in your personal lives as well. Some of you, if you had my intro to business class last year, we covered some similar concepts, but this is a completely different presentation. So here we go. Now, when you took intro to business, you might remember this concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay, so then you know that Maslow's point of view was that we are motivated by different things, and we have these different levels of needs and motivations. At the most basic level, we have some physiological needs, right? Things like air, water, food, correct? Okay, so those are things we need. Then we've got safety level needs. You know, we need to feel like the building's not going to fall on us, for example, right? We need to feel that we're not going to have a bomb dropped on us. Those are important needs for us. So as a human, these are very strong motivators, and they influence our behavior. Once those basic needs have been met, then we can move on to things like social needs, our interaction with other human beings, right? We've got esteem, how we feel about ourselves. And then ultimately self-actualization. And this really represents living your fullest life, being able to take your talents and abilities and desires and pursue them and actually enjoy life. So why am I talking about this? You might be wondering. I'm talking about it because when you think about money and finance, it is both extremely important and not important at the same time. And by thinking of how it fits into Maslow's hierarchy, I think it'll help us really see how money is both important and not important at the same time. For example, do we need money to meet our physiological needs? Yes. Yeah, we live in a society where you do, right? If you want to eat, you need money to buy food. If you want a place to sleep, you need to be able to pay for that, right? We do have some limited social services for people that do not have enough money for those basic needs, but really there's not enough of that to go around. So pretty much everybody has to fend for themselves and have enough money to cover those physiological needs. Does money help you feel more safe? Okay, you could hire bodyguards. You could live in a safer neighborhood or have a safer home or a safer vehicle, right? So money can help us achieve that as well. Does money influence our ability to have friends? Yes? How many say yes?
Not ability to have friends.
Okay.
Do things with friends.
Okay.
Have a certain type of friends.
Okay. So money is useful in being able to go out with your friends or buy gifts for your friends, things like that, right? But you can actually have friends without any money. I mean, ask any kindergartner if they have friends, and yeah, they got a bunch of friends, right? Do they have any money? No, they're broke, but they have friends. They are, right? How about esteem? Do you need money to have esteem? Okay, so some people tie their self-esteem to money or status or income level, right? But ultimately, we really don't need it. You can have a sense of esteem and be dirt poor at the same time. And then to be self-actualized, to actually feel like you can be who you are and who you're meant to be, helps to have money. But some people achieve it without money, okay? So even though this presentation is primarily about how to get invest and use money in your life, keep in mind that's only a tool. It's only a means to an end. Money itself is not an end. And studies that have looked at happiness compared to assets or income tend to show that they have actually a converse relationship. So if you look at countries around the world where people are the happiest, anyone want to guess?
They have less money.
They have less money, and it's countries like Colombia, Bhutan, small countries where people are poor, but they have self-esteem. And they're grateful, right?
I
Philip.
think the reason behind that is because you live in a small country and everybody around you is poor, you really aren't being measured by any scale other than the fact that, hey, shit, you're poor too, so I don't feel bad about nothing or feel bad about myself. When you live in countries like America where you can look out the window or see TV and you're doing financially better than you and start looking at yourself like, I'm not doing that good.
Exactly.
Like,
We
you
have-
have those esteem issues and start to think less of yourself because of that.
We have all this pressure from people we see around us, the cars that are zooming past us on the freeway, right? The commercials that are constantly, coming at us like a fire hose. The things we see in movies, all of this puts pressure on us to make us think, oh, I need more money. When really, if you look at people who've won the lottery, most of them end up broke and depressed. If you look at professional athletes that have, multi-million-dollar contracts every year, most of them end up maybe not depressed, but broke, for a variety of reasons. Yeah, it's about how you use the money, right? So if you're a person who builds up wealth over time, you're more likely to really be cautious with it and smart with your money and make better choices than somebody that just all of a sudden walks into a whole bunch of money. All right, so that's why I show you this hierarchy of needs. We're going to actually come back to this slide in a few minutes because I want to take us a little bit even deeper into our, what it is that actually causes us joy in life, okay? We'll get into that before we actually get into finance. So everybody knows Einstein, right? Famous physicist, brilliant, brilliant person. He could sit in an armchair and just try to solve problems in his head without using an iPad, without using a blackboard. Just sit there and try to figure out gravity, time, space, things like that, and come up with theories that later on people tested out and they said he was right. This thing he figured out in his armchair, even though he didn't do that well in school, he worked as a patent clerk in a patent office. He was kind of nobody, but he was a genius, and eventually the world figured it out, right? So what did he say about our place in the universe? So this is kind of a long quote, but I'm going to read through it. And think, as I read through it here, look for examples of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in this quote. He says, a human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. So he ties in his theory of relativity there, kind of snuck it in there. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feeling as something separated from the rest. Okay, so the way we view ourselves, our thoughts and our feelings, this is all our own individual experience, right? This has to do with our own human motivation and needs. And he's saying that we see ourselves as separate from the rest. Like there's me and there's everybody else. He calls this a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. Okay, what does he mean by that? So the next couple slides will elaborate on this point. He says this delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. So here he's talking about these different levels on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Our desires, our social connections, This is what we tend to focus on in day-to-day life. Then he says, our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. That sounds a little bit more like self-actualization, right? Getting beyond our mundane physical needs, even our psychological and emotional needs, and being more in harmony with our environment. But then he says, nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such achievement is in itself a part of the liberation and foundation for inner security. So according to Einstein, we should be striving for what Maslow called self-actualization. And that process of doing this is what frees us from, the mundane issues of having a job, commuting, these things that we do because we have to, but they don't actually bring us joy. Well, our job can bring us joy, right?
You're trying to tell us something.
Depends on the
You don't
job.
like your job?
I like my job. No, I totally like my job.
You joy.
I've had plenty of bad jobs I could tell you about, and I am very happy to be here. I would rather be here having this conversation with you than probably anything I've ever done. So now, again, Einstein was a physicist. He actually wasn't real keen on quantum physics. He thought it was kind of a little bit too weird. Even though he couldn't disprove quantum physics, and I don't know how many of you have studied it. It's one of my favorite things to read about, although I'm not a physicist. But there were some very influential physicists living at the same time as Einstein that came up with these other theories and these other realizations that, like I said, Einstein just couldn't even believe, even though he couldn't disprove them. One of those scientists was Heisenberg. Anybody heard of him? The Heisenberg Principle? He actually studied how subatomic particles work. And this is back, early to mid 20th century, that quantum physicists are trying to understand the physics behind things so small we can't even see them. Things like atoms and subatomic particles and things that are even smaller than those, right? So that's what he studied. And here's a quote from Heisenberg. He said that after the conversations about Indian philosophy, which, Indian philosophy is very mystical, very cosmic. He said some of the ideas of quantum physics that had seemed so crazy suddenly made much more sense. So they were studying, for example, that particles, like an electron, can be in two places at the same time. Now, this is something science has demonstrated and been able to prove over and over. We can't really wrap our heads around how this is possible, right? But at the same time, Einstein said space and time are relative. So this has been a whole area of study, trying to understand the behavior of these quantum, tiny, tiny, tiny little things that make up the entire universe. It's really mysterious. And it's interesting. I'm not going to go into that. I have another presentation that I've given in the past that actually compares ancient Hindu writings about the universe and how it was created. It's very similar to what physicists are now saying. And how did they know that 5,000 years ago? It's pretty crazy. So anyways, as Einstein had his theories that he was presenting, Heisenberg and some of his contemporaries, they were coming out with other theories that kind of suggested that not only are time and space relative, meaning your progress through time can be different from my progress through time, especially, for example, if you're on a spaceship and I'm not. Not only that, which is weird enough in itself, but that everything in the universe is made from energy, and that time itself only exists because we perceive that it exists. And when you start to study this kind of stuff, and this is why it's fascinating to me, it makes you realize that what we grow up thinking is reality, like that this is a desk here and it's solid. Well, it's not. It's actually not solid. It's solid to us. But what is it made of? It's made of wood and plastic, right? But that's made up of atoms, somebody said, right? It's made up of atoms, and atoms are mostly empty space. And what are atoms made of? They're made up of energy. Really, everything is comprised of energy. It's pretty wild. So when you start studying that and looking at that, you realize, you know, the universe is not really how we perceive it to be. And maybe our place in the universe is not actually what we thought. We're all, if you compare any one of us to the universe, we are so small compared to the universe, right? But at the same time, we're each unique and have our own thoughts, right? Our own experiences and memories that are unique to us. Okay, and it makes money seem very unimportant. In the whole scheme of the universe, money comes and money goes, right? But now put on my financial advisor hat. As a financial advisor, I will tell you, save and invest wisely. Okay? Another contemporary of Heisenberg and Einstein was Planck. He was another great physicist, one of the most famous physicists we've had. He takes it a bit further. He says, and actually several other quantum physicists of his time made similar statements. He said, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. So he said that in 1931, okay? What he's saying there is the opposite of what science will tell you. Most scientists today, if you ask them about consciousness, they have theories. Some believe that our brain creates consciousness. Some people believe that robots could eventually become conscious, even though they don't have brains. Okay, there's a lot of debate about that. But nobody can tell you what consciousness is. Nobody's figured it out. They have theories. In 1931, Planck said, consciousnness is fundamental. Matter, things like this, come from consciousness. Which is, it sounds like really woo-woo, right? But this is one of the greatest physicists ever. So the normal view is that we evolved, life evolved, you know, here on Earth, for example, life evolved, some life forms develop brains, humans have the most advanced brains, and we have the highest level of consciousness, right? That's what science tells us. What Planck is saying was, no, consciousness came first. So that's a little hard to wrap our heads around, right? But there's more and more research that's showing the same thing. If you read stories about people, for example, who've had near-death experiences, where their brain has completely flatlined, they report how their consciousness continued. They were aware of everything that was going on, even while their brain was flatlined. So that tells us that there's more to consciousness than just the brain. Because even when the brain's not functioning, we still have some consciousness. Okay? So that's just food for thought about who we are, our place in the universe. I think that as science continues over the next couple decades, there's going to be a big shift. That's my belief based on what I've read. I think there's going to be a big shift in understanding about consciousness. So with that being said, let's look again at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yes, we have to take care of our physiological needs. We have to protect ourselves and our family members, make sure we're fed, right? Make sure we have water, a place to sleep, and so forth. That is critical. But ultimately, it's who we are inside and the choices we make in our own minds that really makes the difference, right? That's what determines if we're happy or not, if we are going to pursue through difficult times or not. It's all up to our consciousness. There is, are we past break time? Wow. We are.
No, 15 minutes.
Oh, you're right. Okay, from where I am, it looks like it's like 2:43. No, it's not. Now I can see the I can see the minute hand. Okay. All right. Okay. So with that being said, let's talk about finance. Can I get this out of the way somehow? Let's see. It's kind of in the way. Here we go. Oh, didn't work. Ooh, okay, that's better. All right. So those of you who are business majors, it's a good decision. I got my master's in business. I'm getting my doctorate in business. So, you know, I believe in business as a field of study. It's not always the most lucrative field, believe it or not. There are people that make a ton of money in business as entrepreneurs, as managers, as investors. It's certainly possible, but there are a lot of people that study business and, you know, don't end up making a whole ton of money, right? It's a very general degree. You cover so much in business that it helps if you specialize. So people who specialize in finance or accounting, people who specialize maybe in marketing, maybe in IT, and combine that with their business. From my experience, they often are, it's easier for them to get those really cushy, nice jobs. Right here, this tells us that business majors earn 13% less than STEM majors. Okay, so if your main focus is just, hey, I want a nice solid income and easy jobs to find, you might be better off studying science, technology, engineering, or math compared to business. So yes, you can make a lot of money in business, but it's not a guarantee. The top 5 business majors: business analytics. So these are the people that look at data to help with decision making. 130,000 a year, not bad, right? That's a decent income. You could almost live on that around here. I mean, no, that'd be a nice income, even here where it's so expensive. Actuarial science. Anybody know what actuarial science is? So these are the people that work for insurance companies and figure out how much to charge people for their insurance policies, because it's very complicated. There's so many factors that go into play. Person's age, their occupation, their health, so many things factor in where they live. You need big data sets so that the salesperson, when they're getting a quote for somebody, they plug in the person's data and it calculates, here's what your cost is going to be for insurance. So if you're really into math and you want a nice cushy job in the insurance industry, you can make $123,500 a year. Working in the government. Now you wouldn't think, okay, studying business and then going to work for the government. But actually, they're really good government jobs. I have a government job, right? Because this is a community college district. That's who pays my salary. So if you go into working for any governmental agency in their business operations, oftentimes the compensation is competitive. Might not be the best in the world, but it could be pretty good. And the benefits when you work for a government agency tend to be really good, especially if you're represented by a labor union. Then we've got construction project management. So here's combining construction and business, project management to be specific, or international economics. Okay, so this is tying economics and finance and global studies. And of course, there are many other areas you could specialize in business, but these, according to one study, these were the top paying jobs at the time. Okay, questions or comments? Okay, is that right? Yeah. All right, so we're going to look at different aspects of finance. So starting with asset management. Now, you all know what assets are. We've been talking about them all semester, right? We each have personal assets, right? Anything you own of value is an asset. So how do you manage these assets? I think I've told you that there's a great tool called Mint. It's an app you can download. It's a free service, although some of the features you have to pay for, but their basic service is free. Basically, it's an app and a website that you can use to manage and create budgets. So you connect this to your bank account. If you have multiple bank accounts, you can connect it to all of them. It pulls in information from your bank accounts. It categorizes things like your spending, categorizes into different areas. It makes it really easy to budget. It'll just show you, you spent on entertainment last month $300. And you're like, oh, I did, okay. You spent on food $400. You spent on gas $200. And then you can set little budgets for yourself. It doesn't stop you from spending money, but it can send you alerts that, hey, you're over your budget for clothing this month. It can help you stick to a budget.
Can you customize it? Like for your gas, you can customize it for things? Because
Yeah.
I have Mint. I've had it for almost a year and I never used it because I'm like, there's
Yes.
no way I'm only spending like $10 on gas a month. So
Right, so sometimes it's not sure. So like, let's say you go to a place that is not in Mint's database. It doesn't know, is it a gas station or a convenience store? So it might put it in the wrong category. So then you can go in and tell it, okay, anytime I get charged from this place again, consider it a gas expense. So yeah, you can go in and work with it. Mm-hmm. So I used it before. I found it to be very helpful and effective. And my wife and I could both access it and helped us keep track of the budget. Which brings up a whole nother thing. When you do have a significant other that you're managing finances with, that's a whole, there's a whole science to that, because then it becomes negotiation, right? You might have different priorities. And this is really a major challenge for couples, is dealing with finance. The way couples deal with it differently, my wife and I, what we did at one point, she really wanted to have her money that she could spend, and I didn't even know what she was spending it on. And so we just set it up to where she had one account that she used for spending. And we had another shared account that we used for mutual expenses, and then we each had business expense accounts. And so we set it up in such a way that there was not always this common, stress. Like, did you wipe out our bank account? Did you spend money on this or did you spend money on that? So you can, through negotiation, through problem solving, you can come up with ways to collectively manage money. And a tool like Mint could be helpful in that process. Okay, now, sticking to a budget is really important when it comes to saving money. And I'll talk about later why it's critical to save money. When I was in my 20s, I did not understand. To me, I thought, why should I save money today? I'm just going to spend it tomorrow. And I probably would have, right? But later I grew to understand that you're either saving money or you're going into debt. You can only walk that line so long. And the way to keep yourself out of going into debt is to save. So I'll talk more about that later. Point 2 under asset management. Now it's up to you whether you want to keep receipts, but there can be certain advantages. If you need to return a product, sometimes they require a receipt to return it, right? If you have a business or you're an independent contractor, then you can write off certain expenses and save yourself money on taxes. But you need receipts. The IRS, if they audit you, they're going to expect receipts there. If you don't have them, you'll be in trouble. Also, just to help in keeping track of expenses. That being said, if these don't apply to you, then maybe you don't need receipts, okay? I could tell you for years and years, I saved the gas station receipts, you know, when I'd fill up, just in case they charged me wrong. I never had a situation where I got charged wrong. So after like 20 years of doing that, I said, forget it, I'm not saving these stupid receipts anymore. On the other hand, there was another time I took money out of an ATM and I did take the receipt, and it actually, no, I requested money out of the ATM. I got the receipt, I didn't get the money. It never dispensed the money. And so I contacted the bank. I said, look, I know it says it dispensed the money. It never did. It was $200. And they checked and they were able to confirm that that money actually never was dispensed. The receipt probably wouldn't have helped me in that case, so it's probably a bad example. But there are, you know, for big purchases or things that you think you might need to have evidence, maybe it is helpful to have a receipt. Okay, so just something to think about. Avoid debt. We live in a society where, you know, a lot of people have a lot of debt. If it's to buy a house, if it's to get higher education, and you have to have debt, well, at least it's leading to future assets or future income, right? So that would be somewhat understandable. But if it's debt for something else, I would say avoid it. Car, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Buying a car? Yeah, I would say it's a tough call, right? If you buy a really cheap car and then it breaks down, I don't know if I've told you that story. I've got a story for everything. But I spent $4,000 on a car for my son, immediately had to spend $4,000 on repairing the $4,000 car. So it became an $8,000 car. So it's a tough call. Think about it though, a new car, brand new car these days costs what? Minimum $25,000, $30,000. That's a lot of money for an asset that's going to be worth almost nothing by the time you pay it off. Right? So I would say try to be smart. If you can use public transportation, if you could take Uber once in a while and not have that expense, because with the car, it's not only paying for the car, right? It's the gas, it's the maintenance, it's the insurance, it's the stress of commuting. If you can hop on a bus or take an Uber, you know, you might even save money over time. So you have to weigh these things. I would say try to avoid any debt. If you have to take out a loan, let it be for a student loan or buying your first house. Try not to borrow money for anything else. Even starting a business, I would not recommend it. Save. Save, save. Okay? Again, if you're not saving, you're basically going into debt. Okay? Or you're walking right on the edge and then one little emergency and all of a sudden you're in debt. So once you're saving, you can become an investor. A lot of students ask me, how should I invest? What stock should I buy? Now, as a financial advisor, and almost any financial advisor will tell you the same thing, before you start investing, you want to have enough money saved up to cover at least 3 months of your expenses. Because what if you lose your job, or your student loan doesn't come through, or your financial aid, or your car breaks down? You've got to have some money saved up, right? What if they shut off the electricity here like they're doing in Soledad and other areas not so far from us, right? And you can't get to an ATM, right? Sometimes you have to have some money available to pay your bills. So the rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of your expenses saved up. I would recommend you do that before you even think about investing. That's my recommendation. Then when you're ready and you do start investing, don't try to get rich quick. Invest wisely, invest for the long term. If you are doing so well that you've got money to cover your emergencies, you've got your 3 to 6 months saved up, you've got some very safe investments that are performing well, and you want to take a little bit of money and invest it in whatever Bitcoin or, who just went public? Well, I don't know, Uber or whatever. If you want to do that and take a risk, sure, but just realize you could lose that investment 100%, right? Whatever you put in could go down to zero, and be okay with that. So when you're buying stock, keep that in mind, right? So that's only money that you can afford to lose. Isaias?
When you're saying about stock, also another thing that applies, if you are going to buy stock, get stock in something that you know thoroughly and completely.
Mm-hmm.
If you're into sports, if you're into computers, CPUs, if you're into games,
Yeah.
go to the companies that you know and trust.
Okay, that's a good point. So the more you know about what you're investing in, the better decision you're going to make, right? Don't just make an investment because your buddy made an investment and tripled their money in 3 months. Well, if they've already done that, you're getting in possibly at the high, not at the low, right? And the whole idea is buy low, sell high. Okay, so we'll talk more about investing. So a few more minutes and then we'll take a break. So budgeting. Go ahead and take a look at this for a moment. Kind of looks like a soccer ball, doesn't it? Okay, so this is based on, this is one report. It might not be 100% current and accurate. It's based on average income of $75,000 before taxes and $57,000 in expenditures. Okay. So the people that were included in this research here were spending 33% on housing. That's a little on the high side. Traditionally, it's been recommended that you keep your housing to about 25% of your income and your budget. But in this case, especially around here where we live, it's hard to pull that off, right? Right, so that's a challenge. Transportation. Again, it can be very expensive. All those costs associated with owning a car and driving a car, very expensive. If you can come up with alternatives, carpooling, maybe biking if it's safe. I probably told you about my son, skateboarding. It was a good idea until he got into an accident. Fortunately, he's okay. But it's a tough decision, right? You want to be both safe and economical at the same time. Then you've got healthcare. Those costs keep going up. If you can get good health insurance, either from your employer, on one of your family members' plans, if you qualify, maybe from your school. I don't know, does Hartnell offer health insurance for students? I know the UCs do. So if you go to University of California, they've got health insurance plans. And when my son was going to UCSC, they gave him a grant to cover the cost of the health insurance. So he had free health care for 4 years. So, it's tough, but try to find ways to have good health care. Then we've got things like insurance and pensions, retirement accounts. We've got food. We've got entertainment, making contributions to charities, apparel and services, and then we've got other expenditures. Okay, so it's helpful sometimes to look at these averages and just compare and say, okay, how am I doing? I'm spending less on housing, but I'm spending more on transportation. It's a tool for us to really analyze our own finances and figure out how we budget compared to other people. In general, though, the more you can get all of this down and put more into like retirement accounts and savings, the better off you'll probably be in the long term. Okay, any comments or questions on budgeting? Okay, so why don't we go ahead and stop here and come back at 2:45. And like I said, I've got some videos to show you.